I'm Nigel Vanderlinden. This is Collaboration is Culture podcast, exploring how we work together and how to make it better. In this episode, I'm joined by Rachel Conerly, the founder and managing partner of Collaborative Leaders. Collaborative Leaders is an organization that teaches the collaborative operating system, a scalable and highly effective alternative to hierarchy. Rachel has worked for almost 30 years as a trainer and organizational consultant, coaching leaders, teams, and organizations in both the public and private sector. Rachel now works primarily from a small farm in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nigel.
Rachel, one thing I've learned since starting this podcast is that there is an almost universal displeasure, I might even call it disdain, for the current way of collaborating. And my belief is that these sentiments have only gotten louder since the move to remote and hybrid. Tell me, what's broken? What's wrong with the current way of working?
Yeah, I used to love to talk about what's broken, but now what I like to talk about is just limitations, and given what we're trying to do, what's the best approach? Is it hierarchy, whatever that is, and we can talk about that, or is it something else? And might COS be worthy of consideration in terms of how are we going to approach this project? Rarely do we ever sit down and say, given what we're trying to do, what's the best way to approach this? What's the best way to work? Is it collaboration, or should we stick with our command and control, which has produced good results in the past for us, or not,
So why is, or what is potentially the problem with hierarchy?
One of the problems, as we see it, is that it is not much more than an org chart, an organization chart, with some rules and perhaps even what we call some patches. So we take this thing that's an org chart, and then from leader to leader, there can be vastly different implementations of this thing called leadership. And so by streamlining, according to a set of principles, how we work together, we can create a better experience for people. So I think I explained to you earlier, we created the thing called Collaborative Operating System, Tabula Rasa. And what that means is we sat down and we said, given what people need to do in their work world, what should the system be able to enable? And so often what we're experiencing right now is just, this patching phenomenon where people are putting, here's an example of a patch, performance management, right? Or leadership development or conflict resolution. And so when things are not working in a team, what the group will do is find some outside person. Let's do Myers-Briggs. Let's do some personality profiling. All of these are worthy and noble endeavors, but they don't actually scratch the itch. They don't do what we need them to do, which is to create a team alignment, right? Help a group get aligned and help them actually engage at a high level with their work and with each other and accomplish their goals, achieve the strategy of the organization or that particular team.
So how did we get here? Why do we have hierarchy?
That is such a great question. Perhaps it is an evolution, an implicit evolution from way back when it was simple. We're going to invade this neighboring country. We're going to build this pyramid. We're going to, whatever it is we're going to do. And all we needed to do was just have somebody direct everybody. But so often these days, we're dealing with the knowledge economy, and these are workers that often know more than the people that they report to. They're the ones on the front line dealing with the issues, and they need to be able to resolve those issues in a way that they can see that it needs to be resolved. So perhaps it evolved implicitly.
I like that theory. Mm-hmm. I wonder if we have or operating in a hierarchical organization or hierarchical organizational structure, how do we know there's a problem? In other words, what are some of the symptoms, or how might those symptoms show?
First of all, I don't think there's anything but hierarchy. I mean, even my own organization, we're all kind of on a spectrum, and that spectrum has to do with maturity. How mature are the individual members? Because that's a huge indicator of how collaborative we can be. All right. That said, I think when we don't have engagement or sufficient engagement, when we don't have things like accountability, when 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3, and it doesn't even equal 2, it equals 1, for example, then we can start to wonder if maybe we're not using the best system for our application.
So what might that alternative system be? I mean, you've already hinted or floated out the collaborative operating system. Tell us more about that.
Well, this is the paradigm that I'm charged with bringing into the world. All right. And like hierarchy, it is a paradigm. And there are other paradigms, other ways of working. But the collaborative operating system is, by contrast to hierarchy, an explicit design versus an implicit evolution. So as I said earlier, we designed this from scratch based on what do workers need in order to be engaged, in order to produce wonderful results, in order to be accountable, willing to be accountable, held accountable, and to thrive, in the workplace. And so, more concretely speaking, we are based on completely different set of values, or as we call them, principles. So very often, Nigel, when you're trying to apprehend a new paradigm or get your mind wrapped around something very different and new, it's good to compare and contrast. So I'll do that now, if that's okay.
Please.
So hierarchy is based on the values of power and authority. And so the more of these that you can accumulate in the organization, the more you can get done. And this drives the behaviors that you see in the organization. I had a client who called me and told me she's at the top of a global organization. She said, I got a raise. I'm feeling strange because I also lost a number of direct reports. And I'm like, yes, you have been demoted. It doesn't matter if they tripled your salary, based on the values of power and authority, you've been demoted. So the COS, by contrast, is based on the principles of ownership and alignment. Now, we define ownership as the degree to which I see something as mine. I had a hand in creating it. And alignment is the degree to which I and my colleagues, for example, in a team, my teammates, see and understand our work in the same way. So these two principles and working according to them create a sweeping change in the way that work gets done and also in the way people experience it. And very often, especially with young people, when they learn the COS, they're like, oh, of course, this is the way we want to work. This makes so much sense, and they just go about their business working.
Why do you think that particularly resonates with perhaps the younger generation?
I think they were raised with more ownership and alignment. I know with my own daughter, sometimes I tried to boss her around, but starting at age 7, that really stopped working. And by age 14, it was, oh my goodness, it produced the opposite effect.
As a father to a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, I experienced the same.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes.
You were comparing and contrasting the two paradigms, and I know from reading some of the literature your team has published that there's also a difference in winner-take-all, which is more of the hierarchical system, versus a more win-win. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, Win-win is a natural byproduct of working according to the COS. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're dealing with someone who wants to work win-lose, that all of your results can't be improved by using the COS. Win-lose is a mindset, just like win-win is. But the COS really helps you operationalize win-win. And most people, I've been shocked to discover this in our training especially, but most people don't believe win-win is possible. And that is astounding to me. And so I'll have leaders at the top of the organization say, I've never really seen win-win. I find myself skeptical, Rachel, about this. And then I just say to them, that's fine. We welcome your skepticism, but I want you to keep something in mind, and that is just because you've never seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Excellent answer. Where do you think that skepticism comes from?
I think win-lose is a natural byproduct of hierarchy. It's to be expected. So to be surprised in hierarchical organizations, and by that I mean command and control, implicit, the values of power and authority are implicit. Nobody's running around saying the more power and authority you can garner here, the better you're going to do. Everything's implicit, the leadership styles and how one team works compared to another. But I really think that, if we're going to work according to win-win, things are going to have to become explicit, right? Because I can't help you pursue a win, and you can't help me pursue a win if we're not clear with each other, explicit with each other about what the win is. What is it that I want? What is it that you want?
Let's imagine we were transported into an organization that is operating according to the collaborative operating system. Excuse me. What are the behaviors that we would witness?
Right.
How are they behaving differently in a COS?
Right. Well, 100% of our business comes from referral. And what usually happens is someone attends a meeting that is being run in an organization practicing the COS. And sometimes they can't quite pinpoint the gestalt of what they're experiencing, but by golly, it feels really good to them. People are not talking over each other. There's a very orderly path by which we get from A to Z, from alpha to omega. And by the end of the meeting, which ends on time or early, we've accomplished what we set out to do. It's the way we want to work. It's the way we want to be together,
It's the way we want to collaborate.
It is.
So tell us more about how the collaborative operating system works.
It depends on the organization, so it can be different. There's no perfect formula for getting started. Sometimes it starts with one person that gets trained in the COS and just starts using it. And that's the way you first experienced it, if I'm correct. Yeah. But other times, I'll go in at the very senior level and work with the leadership team. One of the best ways for it to start working, get traction, and feel right and true and good to people is to use it on a problem that they've never been able to solve. And something that they all agree, this is bothersome, this is a problem. We patch around this problem. We don't attend to it properly and solve it. Because the COS can really shine in that instance. It can solve the problem, but also it feels differently in the solution of it, and people are willing to behave differently and try new things when there's something painful that they've never been able to address. So I think also just like walking into the system differently, walking in using these win-win tools and techniques and templates and so forth has an immediate effect.
building from identifying the problem, which I understand is one of the 5 elements of the costs. What comes next?
Well, the first thing we ask an organization to do is to align around the problem, because we know that unless a group of people gets aligned around the problem they want to solve, they'll never be sufficiently aligned around the solution to that problem. If you look around the world, what you're going to discover anywhere that there is conflict and fighting, we're arguing over solutions, and we've never stopped to align around the problem. If you listen to the major media, all they do is report on solutions that are being implemented, and they declare the problem when, no, the stakeholders have not had input to that problem. So after that, it's important to take that problem that we've identified and start to involve the right people. That is, the people that are the stakeholders off that problem. So you can imagine now there's sort of an iterative back and forth aspect to this, because when I start involving different people in that problem, they're going to say, you don't quite have it right. This is actually the problem, or these are features of the problem. And so then we have to change the problem statement, and then the stakeholders might change a little bit. So we call this a go slow to go fast approach, because there is that kind of beginning aspect of creating the high levels of ownership and alignment that are going to help us sail across the finish line. Element 3, after we get the right stakeholders in the room, and that can change as things go on, is design and facilitate collaborative meetings. So we just start meeting right away in this collaborative fashion. And by doing our work according to the principles of ownership and alignment and in a win-win fashion, explicitly, it's creating a kind of high trust environment and high engagement. Element 4 is form a collaborative team. So after we start, maybe just had our first meeting, we want to do what we call team formation. And team formation has 2 key aspects. One of those is agreements. We need to form agreements by which we're going to work. And let's face it, they might vary from team to team. This team's work might require much more robust, long-standing, enduring agreements than a team that's doing a different kind of work.
And what is the benefit of that team agreement, and how is it used, let's say, in conducting collaborative meetings or a collaborative engagement?
Well, it's another way to be explicit. So every time people get together and engage with one another to do some kind of work, whether it's here on my farm with my own community or in some of the organizations I'm helping, they have expectations. They have needs. They have desires for how things are going to go. I may want everybody to show up 5 minutes early so we can get our chit-chat out of the way. Other people may have a different idea about agreements and what they want and need. But we need to make those explicit. And this is such a beautiful beginning, because mature adults make their needs known, and then they negotiate those needs with other adults. So see, here's that level of maturity that we were talking about earlier. And so this is just absolutely key that we learn. I mean, if I could only teach one thing, it would be that people are different. People are different. And so let's start dealing with that, and working according to that. That's not going to go away, right? We're going to have to state and negotiate our needs.
I've heard you use the word explicit a few times in this conversation. I've also heard it in other circles described as intentional or intentionality. Yeah. What you're suggesting is that we be intentional when we set out to form a team and ultimately determine how that team collaborates. Absolutely. And I might even say it this way: let's be explicit about our intent so that we can get ownership and alignment around it. But just going back, the other part of team formation
is actually co-creating a charter or something that enables us to be very explicit about our goals for our work. Now, you can see right away, like, this is going to be overkill for some small problems that can be solved with one meeting, right? But in other long-standing, highly charged, painful issues, it's not. And so then the fifth element is create a collaborative plan. And we would say create a collaborative plan collaboratively. Now, do these fall out in this natural order? No, this is the way we teach them. And in reality, people might often use these 5 elements differently, in a different order according to their need. But this is in a theoretically perfect world.
May I ask, what is a collaborative plan?
Again, it's one that's created collaboratively. And so let me just say something about that. In the common world out there, we have this idea that we need to look at current state, we need to look at the future state we want, and then map a goal to get from here to there. But in a COS world, we want to know what's the process by which we're going to define the current state. What's the process by which we're going to define the future state? What's the process by which we're going to define the steps to get from the current state to the future state? So there's a layer of process included here. And COS practitioners are masterful at process. And I often say what distinguishes a COS leader from a hierarchical leader is a hierarchical leader is content driven. They walk in the room, perhaps. I hate to make these statements like this, but let's go with it for a minute. And they just dump their content. We're here to do this. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we're doing, right? And they already know the answer and the outcome that they want, perhaps. But they're leading with content, and a COS leader, by contrast, is leading with process. Group, how shall we create the strategic plan for the coming year? Because, Nigel, the degree to which you get ownership and alignment around the process determines the degree to which you will have ownership and alignment around your content. Is critical. You can send your staff to Hawaii as a bonus for having a really great year, but if you don't make that decision based on an explicit process that everybody agrees with, you're in trouble. One of my clients did this and it was like, what? We can't bring our partners? We can't bring our kids? What about our, they were up in arms. And here he was trying to do something really nice. Well, this happens all the time. If you look at spouses, partners, maybe you with your kids, I don't know. But, what invariably happens in these fights or conflicts that we have over and over with people is there's a process issue. Like somebody doesn't like your process and therefore you don't like their content,
I like that delineation that you've made between process and content. I think that's very helpful. And what I'm also hearing you say is collaboration is often mistaken for this almost amorphous being without form.
That's right.
And
it's
actually it's process.
Yes, and to our way of thinking, it's win-win process. And for it to be win-win, it has to be explicit.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So who is this for? Is it for everyone in an organization? Is it for every meeting or every collaboration? Who needs to be hearing this and actioning it?
Yeah. One of the terrific things about the collaborative operating system is that everybody can benefit from using it, even the most command and control leaders. Because whenever you make things more explicit, like the process you're going to use or demand that they use, the goals that you're going to demand that they achieve, things are going to go better. So think of it as a scale, and you can turn it up and use a little bit or a whole lot. It's pretty powerful medicine, so we recommend our clients use it just a little bit at first, because little bit can create, the sweeping changes that can kind of overwhelm a group. But people work in hierarchies because there's something that feels comfortable about it to them. There's something that resonates with them about their maturity level. People have to leave organizations when they no longer are resonating with the values of the organization.
Very true. Very true. And is there something about, this present context for which the collaborative operating system, is an important answer to or solution for? Like, what about now? What about this present circumstance makes the collaborative operating system important?
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but, if we're not in the workplace together and we're on a Zoom call or whatever, we maybe don't have the same ability to navigate our way through thorny, difficult, challenging spots. And so the COS does provide a way to do that. And to that end, I think it is extremely helpful in creating the order that we all so desire out of the chaos that has become our outer world existence for, in large part. More and more people are just running around trying to accomplish things, and they've lost sight of what the priorities are. I hear this over and over again. Well, that wouldn't happen with COS practitioners. They have a way of walking in, surveying the landscape, delineating, you'll love this, the hierarchical relationship of the different facets of the landscape, and then going to work on those in a collaborative fashion. So I'll just tell you what we're seeing is that the people who have learned this and are proficient practitioners are knocking it out of the park in their remote or hybrid workplaces right now. They've always done well, and they're shining really brightly right now.
If I only just reflect on intentionality, or as you've said, being explicit, I can certainly see how that applies to the remote/hybrid working world. As opposed to being in person or in the same space at the same time, remote and hybrid can sometimes be a dearth of information that if we were in the same room, we might have picked up on, we might have got signals, etc. And so we now must be intentional in order to seek out that information, to explicitly understand the people that we're working with, how they like to work, the goals we're all working towards, and so on.
That's right. Explicit about our intentions.
So what are the benefits of this system? What are the benefits of the collaborative operating system?
This is the place where we started, but it is about the natural byproducts. The bench gets built. People want to be accountable. People have high levels of engagement. They're willing to work their heart out in order to achieve the goals. They have the good feeling vibe of the support of their fellow teammates. So it's about what naturally happens, that we don't have to hire for a patch anymore, It's about what naturally unfolds. And one of those is trust. A key feature is trust. And we define trust as the degree to which I feel you are benevolent, the degree to which I feel you have the skills and the motivation, both are important, to do the job, and the degree to which I feel you are predictable and reliable, especially when the stakes are high and the chips are down. And so this is really operationalizing trust. We don't even have to talk about it. It's just a natural byproduct of working this way.
If I reflect on some of the benefits or byproducts of the costs that you've spoken about over the course of this conversation, trust, respect, accountability, personal responsibility, win-win outcomes, I arrive at the conclusion that this is culture. And
nice.
These are elements of culture. What do you think about that?
I love what you're doing. You're the only person I know who is stating it this way, other than us, which is the culture gets formed as a byproduct of the way we work together. And when it's this chaotic, unprioritized, implicit approach, we're in trouble. We're not going to feel rejuvenated and the life generating thing we want to feel. We're going to feel it as a life denigrating endeavor, And for some people, they're trying to do their purpose. They're seeing their work as a vocation and a calling. Well, this is highly problematic. I would say other features and byproducts have to do with communication, and that's such a hot spot in organization. People hate meetings. They feel like communication is always problematic.
Right.
And those are really natural byproducts of the COS as well. So important outcomes. There's a concept I'd love to share.
Please.
And that really is something we've known internally, but one of the men in the audience when I gave a talk out in San Francisco, he is a divinity academic in university out there. And I was explaining how everybody's so hip to this thing called diversity and inclusion, but most people don't know how to design for diversity because it creates enormous complexity. The more diversity you have, I don't care what kind it is, the more complex you're making your work. And already our work is too complex for most people to, really navigate in an elegant and satisfying way and a meaningful way, And when I was finished talking, he just stood up and he goes, I can't believe this. He goes, for 4 years, my department has been hiring to create the most diversity we can possibly create. And he goes, we can't even talk anymore. All we can do is go have a beer and not talk about anything work-related. And he said, this helps me understand, So the COS is about designing for the level of complexity inherent in the work. It's about dealing with what is. That's what it's about. Dealing with what is. What's real here.
I love that. Rachel, how can the listeners stay connected with you?
They are welcome to email, and we will put them on a list. One of my colleagues and I are about to launch a podcast called Work Worth Doing.
Oh, wow. And
it's going to be, yes, very much about the COS. We're going to give out real live tools, like how do you do a collaborative hire? How do you do a collaborative onboarding? How do you collaboratively handle being fired? It's going to run the gamut. And also then some of the psychological aspects, because I'm just so passionate about psychospiritual matters. So we're going to impart some of what we've seen in that regard.
Well, I'm so excited to listen.
Oh, good. And so they can just write to me at rachel@thecos.org, and we'll put them on this podcast list. And then I also shared a paper with you. They could read that, and if that's interesting, we could start some dialogue about it.
We'll certainly put that in the link, and I know your website is www.thecos, so thecos.org. Rachel, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. As always, I've learned so much from hearing you speak and elaborating more on cost as an alternative to hierarchy. So thank you.
Good. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Nigel.